Good afternoon, and welcome to Analyzing the Key Options for Your Enterprise Imaging Journey, a health system CIO production sponsored by Highland Healthcare. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first, we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel featuring Paul Butz, System VP, IT Clinical Applications with Baptist Health System of Kentucky and Indiana. Monique Rasband, Vice President, Strategy and Research for Imaging, Informatics, and Oncology with KLAS. And Lyle McMillan, Senior Manager of Project Management with Highland. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Important topic today and lots to discuss. Paul, let's start with you. Can you give me an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. Baptist Health, we're a 8-hospital system that we wholly owned, and then we have 2 other hospitals that are joint ventures, all within Kentucky and Indiana, largest healthcare system in Kentucky. We're about 2,300 licensed beds, revenues right around 3.9 billion. That's kind of the system in a nutshell. My position in the organization, System Vice President IT, so nurse by background, but moved into IT as we started our enterprise EMR journey. I have responsibility for all of our clinical applications in the ambulatory space and the inpatient acute space, as well as our clinical informatics teams that provide end user training at the elbow support in our acute hospitals.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you. Monique?
Hi, how are you, everyone? Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for hosting. Really appreciate it. My name is Monique Rasband. I am the Vice President of Strategy and Research at KLAS, and my specialty, imaging, informatics, and oncology. And funny enough, that keeps growing and growing. So now cloud and imaging is obviously under our team. AI pathology has been growing. So it's really fun to see that momentum. It's nice to be with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Monique. Lyle?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lyle McMillan. I'm a Senior Manager of Product Management at Highland, and myself and my team are responsible for the entirety of the healthcare portfolio at Highland, which includes our enterprise medical imaging products, as well as our healthcare content services products. So I've been in healthcare 18 years in a variety of vendor roles, and I'm excited to be with you here today.
All right, very good. We're ready to jump into the meat of it. How would you define enterprise imaging? Is it a direction or destination? Is there an end state that is achievable, or is it just something we're moving towards? Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I would say for us, enterprise imaging, it started with some consolidation of individual packs at each of our locations, and now we're starting to grow that and bring in some of our ambulatory offices that have had their own PAC systems. And so that's kind of the foundation, is getting everybody on the same platform. And then we look to start expanding into other types of imaging that might be more point of care that we typically don't do today. To the question of is a destination or direction, I think it's a direction. I don't know that with all the development that's occurring that we'll ever get to an endpoint, but it's still trying to make it easier for our clinicians to access the images so they can care for patients, and also as our docs that are interpreting these images are becoming more and more remote and harder to, especially in the radiology space, it's harder to recruit. And so we're having more of that. So having those images readily available for those interpreting providers to interpret and help with the turnaround of those is another key element to this whole platform.
Very good. Okay, Monique.
Yeah, great question. So how would I define enterprise imaging? I think I'm probably the luckiest person on the phone. We take our marching orders and all of our data from the healthcare organization, the healthcare providers. So when we are working through our questions and our research on enterprise imaging, There is a basic definition that we were given through one of our enterprise imaging summits that providers and vendors sat down together. So again, luckily we stayed out of it. We took that information, but it really is at the organization. So for enterprise imaging, consolidation of PACS, we're seeing that very common, to Paul's point. And I remember when I started at KLAS, this was 15 years ago, people were consolidating and getting on one PACS or one cardiology system. And that seemed like it was moving along, going well. And then all the acquisitions with healthcare providers happened where they're acquiring imaging centers or other hospitals. So all of a sudden they had more systems than when they even started out with consolidation. So that is definitely still alive and well with consolidation. We also hear people talk about enterprise imaging across where can they consolidate, but also when it comes down to treating and caring for the patient, how can they all have visibility to that? So we've seen that done through a VNA. We've also seen some other interesting ways and also growing. So service lines comes up quite often in how do people expand and how do they move out into service lines. So I would say it's both a destination and a direction, very much like what Paul said. There is a way people are going. Will we ever have a complete end state? It does not sound like it with all the development. I've certainly been very busy. Every year it seems like more on our plate and more things to research. But it does feel like there are milestones. And in some cases, I love to see people wrap up and have a state of achievement. But I think we're definitely in this for the long haul. So all the people on the call have a healthy career ahead of them.
Excellent. Very good. Lyle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what my co-panelists have said up to this point. I don't think there's an end state that you will get to as an organization where you sit down one day and you say, wow, I've really done this. I've now achieved enterprise imaging across my organization. I do think there's a point at which you can get to a level of completeness in your enterprise imaging strategy that will allow you to sit back and say, I'm now able to accomplish all the tasks I need to accomplish because I'm now effectively managing the data I have in my organization. And what's kind of interesting about this discussion is that if you look back 10 or 15 years ago when, and I'm coming at this from the viewpoint of a VNA, which is one of the products that my team manages. When you look 10 or 15 years ago, CIOs were saying, look, we want to put VNAs in place because we have a lot of PACS systems. We want to get all the radiology images into one location and we want to make those available throughout the organization. And that the concepts that were kind of pioneered then haven't really changed a whole lot. But what has changed is that the rest of the organization, the other imaging specialties that exist outside of radiology, and then of course as a follow-on cardiology, those images have become much more valuable, both to the physicians or the caregivers who want to have that information at their fingertips, but also for the researchers and the IT staffs that are tasked with deploying AI tools throughout the organization. That the rest of that information is becoming more valuable. So that concept of bringing the information together in one place for maybe radiology and then maybe cardiology as a second stepping stone is starting to expand out. So I see that direction kind of continuing. People are going to continue to bring more and more into their enterprise medical imaging strategy, and whatever that strategy takes on from an infrastructure perspective is definitely open to debate. But they'll start to bring more and more of those imaging specialties under control of that strategy. And I think that's the direction most people are going to continue to head. Do they get to a point where they have them all, or they've gotten the most critical ones? I think it'll all happen once they've achieved some of the larger objectives that their organizations have, and they may sit back and say, this is enough. Most organizations haven't gotten there today.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this concept, Lyle, of these images becoming more valuable. Can you go into that a little bit more? Help me better understand that.
Yeah, I think as researchers, especially for the academic medical centers that we serve, we're seeing that organizations are starting to place a greater level of value on making sure the content that they manage is portable. And so let's look back 10, 15 years ago. Most of the reimbursements and a lot of the revenue that was coming from imaging, or most of the revenue coming from imaging, was in radiology. the radiology department. And so a lot of the funding, a lot of the focus of the vendor communities all went to that department, and rightfully so. It's a, you know, it's a revenue source for the organization, and the resources that serve those workflows have to be, you know, given the best of everything to be successful and be the most efficient that they can be. Other departments, you know, let's say dermatology, ophthalmology, plastics, you know, photos that are taking in the ED, things like that weren't given as high a priority. They were used maybe for a specific purpose immediately during the visit or shortly thereafter, and either discarded or stored in a very haphazard way. And so as we start to see organizations look at those other departments and look at the content that is either being mismanaged or isn't, you know, isn't being managed at all, they're starting to say we need to bring this under the fold of our enterprise medical imaging strategy, because we have downstream use cases now that maybe weren't there before. We want to make this content part of the you know, the patient record, or at least viewable alongside the content that's in the medical record. We also want to make this content available for researchers. They're able to now, you know, marry up, you know, different pieces of data from different specialties and have a much more complete view of the patient. And then of course there's the clinicians that are wanting to see everything across the board. And so that to me is why this content's becoming more valuable over time, and why we're seeing more and more people say it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable any longer to have your images stored on a you know, an SD card or on a USB drive. We need to have a strategy for archiving these things and making them available to the rest of the organization.
That's great. Paul, I'd like your thoughts on what Lyle just explained. Does that resonate with you, what he's talking about? You have multiple elements of why you need to get these images in a centralized, more accessible place, one of which is billing, right? Because we want to capture billing. We're taking images. That's a billable event only if we have captured the image properly, and all the patient safety and patient care reasons and research. But billing is another element of this. But I'd like your thoughts on what Lyle said.
So yes, I agree with you on the piece that the billing is a piece of that as well, and the point of trying to get the images available to our clinicians wherever they're providing the care is another key element of this as well. And so I think that's, you know, trying to make that less of a on-premise footprint. And so I think we've got some cloud structures there. I think the point to what he said, the value of the data, you know, there are a lot of developers that are going out there, and we have companies that approach us saying, hey, you have all this data. We really would like to train models on this so that we can do things like that. And there's a piece of being able to de-identify some of that data so it can be used and shared in that way. But trying to figure out what is the right path in there. So it's still an emerging area from that, but the data is very, very valuable to our organization. So having a way to really consolidate that and manage it is very important.
All right, very good, Monique. We're going to start with you on this question. The premise of this webinar is that every health system will have a different starting point in their enterprise imaging journey, and thus the paths will not look the same. The strategies will not be the same. That being said, what are some typical scenarios we see, and what are some more general examples of moving towards it? So I'd like you to jump in there. You know, we've heard terms so far about obviously the EMR is sort of the holy grail of where we want everything to be accessible, if not to live, at least to be accessible via. PACS, we've obviously heard the idea of PACS consolidation. We've heard the term VNA. So different ways to approach this based on where you're starting from, but your thoughts on some high level principles here.
Yeah, great question. I love this question. It's one I get often. So we started before the audience joined. I was saying I truly feel like I have the best job at KLAS, the luckiest person, because I get to talk with everyone that is looking at their enterprise imaging strategy. Either they're starting or they went down the road and maybe two systems came together with an acquisition or a partnership and with aging technology. So this is something that I hear and see literally every day. We are all starting at a different point. And as I mentioned before, it comes down to consolidation. So where's the health system starting out with their PACS and or their VNA? Do they have one system? Do they have multiple systems? And then what is the end goal? And cloud is even starting to come into this now. Are we going to have, providers will say, are we going to have images, in the cloud? Is that a backup? Is that disaster recovery? Are we going to do a hybrid approach? And so everybody definitely has a different starting point depending on what they have now and what that end goal is going to be. Best practice that we see often, and providers tell us we wish we would have looked at this a little bit stronger in the beginning before we went down the road. What does the governance look like? And what is that end goal? Where do providers want to be? And then to start to work a little bit backwards. We also have a lot of best practices that we hear around the committees. Who's going to be on that committee? Who does it include? How do the clinicians share their vision, what they're working on with the IT department? And then vice versa, how does the IT department know and understand what the clinicians are doing? These are all very different departments and often don't realize there could be a main place to store, such as a VNA or a universal viewer. So sometimes these departments are going down the road not realizing there is an overall enterprise imaging strategy. They don't need new solutions. They could come back and connect right into the VNA that's already there and available for them. So that is something that we see as both a challenge and an opportunity. The other piece of that would be, in addition to the governance, point of care ultrasound. I know in the last question, we talked about revenue and capturing it. That's another area, again, a difficulty, but also an area for opportunity. There are a lot of point of care ultrasounds right now out there buzzing around that there was not an order, they're not being captured, they're not being stored, and thus there's no revenue. So just another area where we see that's growing really hot and something that is to be on the radar for those that are looking in that direction.
Excellent. Lyle, your thoughts?
So I think kind of the best practices as I think through what we've seen our customers do, and especially the ones that we would consider more of the lighthouse type customers. Obviously, I think the governance is a great starting point. I won't go too deep in that. I think Monique did a good job with it. You know, a lot of this is more around navigating the bureaucracy of an organization than the technological solutions. And so having those committees and empowering those other departments to come to the table with their needs and being able to marry those with kind of the traditional needs of the radiology cardiology departments, which oh, by the way, still from a reimbursement perspective still drive a lot towards the profitability of a hospital. It is very complicated, and it's not something that you can just throw a rule book down and someone can read and go accomplish. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of focus and commitment from the organization. So I do think that's a fantastic place to start. If I was to look at it from, though, taking it one step further, maybe into the details around, more of a policy or a first step I would take if I was an organization going down the path of trying to deploy an enterprise imaging strategy, I would look at the capture side of things and the normalization of your data, the consistency of your data across your organization. I think long term, that's the biggest problem most people run into that we, the customers we speak with, is even if you get all your content into one place, you still have the fact that you may have acquired a bunch of organizations over the years. You may have divested organizations. You may have different EHRs. You may have dozens of PACS, depending on the size of your organization. You probably got decades of different indexing schemas and philosophical choices that were made around how to save data, where to save it, how much information was necessary. And so before any of that content can be useful, you have to kind of start with a day forward approach on how do I acquire and index my content very consistently. And to me, that would be something I would point or I do point my customers to all the time is start to think about the capture side of things, the content that's coming from the modalities. What are your modalities? How do we make sure that they're indexing based on, you know, the enterprise source of truth clinical systems that you use throughout your organization, making sure that they're all using the same systems as much as possible, so that at least you start to solve the problem as soon as possible. Now you still have to go back and deal with some of the, you know, the sins of the past, the data that was collected in a variety of different ways, and you know, go through a variety of mechanisms to normalize that. But it's something that in the early stages I would start to think, how do we make things better from day forward, and then start to move ourselves down that journey that we've all kind of been hitting on, which is starting to incorporate all of the content from the organization over time. So that's probably the piece that doesn't seem as exciting to most people is the capture portion of it and the indexing portion, but it's something that could be solved relatively easily at the front end and could save you a lot of time further down the road.
Lyle, what about DICOM? That doesn't solve all your problems, and you're all good?
In
Everyone has
theory.
this, yeah, everyone has the same tags. They unfortunately don't populate those tags with the same data, or even if I mean, they obviously, you know, there are many ways to identify a body part, and those can vary across even hospitals within a health system. Procedure descriptions, all that varies quite a bit. So yeah, DICOM is compared to my peers in the other verticals that Highland supports. I'm very happy to have, you know, have a standard like DICOM, but it's still, we run into a lot of problems just because of there's so many different ways to tag the data and still be accurate and still be correct.
Yeah,
So,
agreed.
Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the data sets for all these images, it's so much volume, and it takes so long to migrate data. And so some of the key questions that we look at as we're onboarding new sites is really trying to hold true to our record retention policies. And you know, because there's always a desire when it comes to imaging, I want to be able to see everything that the patients have, so I can do, you know, good comparisons. But that storage starts to get really expensive as well with as much space as these images take. So I think it's, as you're looking at all of this, it's really, as Lyle said, making decisions up front as you start down this journey of what are we going to do, what is our data retention policies going to be, and you know, really holding true to that, so that storage growth doesn't, it just can expand so quickly. We're working with our vendors right now to come up with a automated path to where we can actually stay true to those record retention policies as the studies start to age out. And so to try and curtail some of that growth, because you know, we're all, as health systems, we're all dealing with reduced revenues and, you know, smaller operating margins. And so it's, we got to do everything we can to really keep everything in check and still be able to provide great patient care.
Excellent. Paul, you want to tell us a little more about sort of the journey you're on, where you've come from, and sort of the goals as they're currently standing?
Sure. So we started out in our radiology side, and the way that we were previously set up was that each of our facilities had their own instance of the radiology application, and similar on cardiology side. And so as we move forward, we standardized. So we have a radiology and a cardiology PACS system still, but they both are now enterprise. So the benefits of that is being able to easily share those images from location to location, because previously when it was individual sites, we had, you know, we were having to do like send CDs or use a, you know, image sharing vendor to be able to share those images from one of our own hospitals to another. And so getting on the enterprise imaging platform, that helped that go a lot smoother. So it allows us to tap into those clinical experts that may not be at the the location where the patient is, they might be across the state, and we need to tap into that expertise. We've been able to see some increased collaboration of being able to do that. So those really were our first steps to do that, and we're now into the point of our ambulatory practices and starting to bring those onto our enterprise imaging suite, because those have, whether it's orthopedics or, maybe it's a specialized breast center or whatever, they all historically had their own system. So now we're starting to bring those into our standard enterprise. And then, like I said, as we go down, then we're really starting to look at, okay, what could we do for a VNA? How do we start to bring in the point of care ultrasounds that we talked about? How do we bring in images that might be captured from a robotic surgery? Or, there's just so many different places where medical images are being captured within the patient's journey. And so it's trying to consolidate all of that to have that central storage location. So like I said, it's a long journey, and it's a very expensive journey, but just take little steps at a time to get there.
All right, let's go into that a little bit. So you said you've decided to standardize on one PACS for radiology and one PACS for cardiology from many, I assume. There were a number being used in different areas. Okay, we're going to standardize on one for each of those areas, correct?
Correct.
So that can be, and that's something we should go around the horn with, but I'd like you to talk about it a little bit first. That is not the easiest process in the world. Whenever you have to get individuals to give up the one they're using and to come onto a different one, that can be difficult. As you said, like Lyle said, or someone said, these are high revenue generating areas. People like to use what they're using. So that's a process of convincing folks, hey, we're standardizing, doesn't happen to be on the one you're using, so you're going to have to use a different one. So we're standardizing for one for radiology and one for cardiology, which is what you mentioned. There's no VNA yet in the mix. That means that those two, we can't send images between those at the moment, correct? Because they're two separate systems. Anyway, take me through a little bit of that.
Yeah, so we still use our EMR to be the connecting point for both of those. So the differences come in from on the interpretation side. So if you have a radiologist interpreting, they're working in one system. If you have a cardiologist that's interpreting and it's a cardiac imaging, then they're interpreting in another. But as a end user of that, when I go into the EMR to look at a report and I click on the link to go to that image, it's opening up seamlessly. So we do that work in the background. So then that way, from the person providing care, they're not having to log into multiple systems. It's auto launching in the background to be able to get to the image that they're wanting to review. Now, granted, they're not diagnostic quality at that point. It's reference quality. So I think those are some of the key differences. And how we got started. The vendor that we had for radiology, they were moving to their enterprise platform, and so we were at that point to where, with finances and whatever else, we were trying to consider what path do we go down, and it ended up being really less expensive for us to continue going down the path of switching to the enterprise platform, which helped us with consolidation. So I know some organizations may go out and do a full RFI and look at all the different vendor options that were there. For us, we were able to at least stay with the same vendor. The big change for this was moving from the single site instance to more of the enterprise. It really was a platform shift. And so that was a big learning key for our interpreting providers, was to really understanding that you were getting a brand new system. It wasn't what you're used to.
Yeah.
And so that we had some growing pains with it, but we've been able to get there.
All right, great. Let me bring Lyle back in here, and then we'll go to you, Monique. What Paul was talking about makes me think of, we talked about governance, right? We talk about use case. We talk about having a vision of what we're trying to do. He mentioned sort of using Epic as the access point to those two systems for referential viewing, not for diagnostic viewing. So again, you're solving for a use case, right? We don't need to solve for a diagnostic view use case if that's really not necessary. So again, this all comes back to governance and the vision of what are the use cases we're trying to solve, so we don't create, extra work that we don't need. Does that make sense?
It does. We have this, this is, I've seen, obviously we were discussing questions before we got on this call, and I was thinking through some of the answers. When you start talking about enterprise imaging journeys, it's not something we're going to be able to lay out on this call for that, lay out a path for every customer that's going to be the same. Every provider that's on this call or in, that we service across the globe, it's starting at a different point, and they have different objectives and different resources available for them to achieve those objectives. What what you know there are ways that you can start to put in place the foundations for an enterprise medical imaging strategy without, and each of those strategies have varying degrees of disruption that you're willing to take on. And so we see customers, starting, from the packs sometimes, and getting radiology and cardiology in order, and then starting to add in the other specialties, which seem to be more maybe how Paul's heading down. We see others that leave the diagnostic areas alone and start to look at, at the back end systems like a VNA or an enterprise viewer to focus on more of getting the other specialties brought in, getting archive images brought in, making that content available through the referential pathways forward. So using that EHR both as an indexing source, but also as a launch point to gain access to that content. And I think both those pathways have merit depending on where you are in your organization, and how you're envisioning this playing out. So there are no one likes change. And so when you're talking, you always have to take into account the disruptions that's gonna occur if you change out a PAC system. Is that something that you want to take on at this point? Is it going to get you enough gain based on the financial burden that you're going to take on? Or do you want to focus more on the other ologies, the archived images, and focus more on the referential use cases, which could have, equally wonderful benefits for your organization, but may cause less disruption to the more established departments. So I think both are valid. I don't know if I have, I could flip a coin, but as far as which one's better, but I think as an organization, you have to kind of look back and say, what's my risk for change? What am I willing to put down? And really, what am I trying to accomplish? Is it I'm trying to provide higher levels of patient care? Maybe I do want to focus on the referential side of things, having a complete patient record for my rounding physicians. Or, is it I'm wanting to drive AI algorithms, or is it I have a research team I want to enable to be more efficient and more effective? I think that's going to help you kind of uncover what your ultimate path should be, and then using those governance committees and the other things to make it happen, I think would be the next step going forward.
Monique, I'm going to bring you in. Lyle, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think, this concept you brought up of trying to determine the level of disruption that that you're up for is really right on, because that can define your pathway. Um, I've interviewed executives at health systems that have sort of, in my opinion, been almost at opposite ends of the spectrum on deciding a strategy.
Mhm.
Some have said, I'm going to let my people, to a certain degree, use whatever packs they're comfortable with. We're going to handle the integration on the back end. I want people, because I see that as a sticking point. I see that as trouble ahead. So I don't want to go there. I'm going to deal with it on the back end. I've heard other folks say, I'm not going to deal with it on the back end because it's a nightmare. Everybody's going to one packs, and we're going to be beautiful after we get over that nightmare of ripping everybody's favorite toy away. I've heard both from really smart people. These are strategies currently being employed by health systems out there right now, what I would describe as almost different directions, maybe to get to the same point, but different directions. Monique, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, these are all really great points. And I echo many, many of the things that my colleagues on the call have said. it is interesting, and I have to give the vendors credit for we haven't really dove in yet for universal viewer, and that can be both diagnostic and it can be referential. One of the things that makes me smile so big on calls, on our research calls, when we're talking to a healthcare provider, it could be IT, it could be clinical, depending on their level, and they start talking about how easy it is to go in, they click one button in their EMR, and it is so incredibly seamless and well integrated. Oftentimes, they even think that it is the EMR viewer. Now, we know under the covers that's not the case. It's from a third-party vendor. But that is a beautiful problem to have when the providers just know it's so easy to click that they think it is the actual EMR. So it has come a long ways. Those calls were not always like that. Before. There would be integration issues. There were all sorts of things that were reported. And I just want to give the vendors credit for bringing those universal viewers up to speed, and having such tight integration within the EMR. So that is one point I wanted to mention. Also agreed that there are two ends of the spectrum, and depending on who you talk to and the numbers that you get, I have heard anywhere from about 3,000 radiology jobs right now for the shortage. And I had a chief that I work with, very trusted, that said, oh, I recently saw somewhere and there were about 5,000 radiology jobs. So if you think about that shortage, and then this is brought up often and many times. I believe it was, I've heard about 2010, and people started talking about AI, and AI is going to replace radiologists. We've all heard that over time. And what has happened, they're not replaced. I think it's going strong. In fact, I was with a radiologist on Sunday who was telling me on Saturday on call had 240 something cases on call. And I joked saying, oh, a bunch of people broke fingers and toes. And he's like, oh no, that was neuro, that was lung, that was all over the board. So if you think about that volume for a radiologist on a call day, that is just not sustainable. So something has to give with the technology. And I think that's where that push and pull comes to. Yes, there needs to be consolidation, but also within consolidation, what is the smart move and what's going to make physicians more efficient and have those quicker outcomes and then be able to get to those images faster. So I think that is something that comes right back to the strategy, putting the burden, and burnout is real. And we hear that across all specialties. So again, I stick up for the imaging people and the providers that I talk to and work with. It is a real thing in our space and something that has to be taken into consideration. Now, with all that technology, and it goes back to your question on a milestone or on the destination, or, is this ever going to end? I don't think so. Equipment is getting more complex. It's getting better. The AI hopefully will be able to solve some of those workflow problems, but I think this is a really long journey.
Excellent. I want to follow up with Paul on the point Monique made about the burden on radiologists, hundreds of cases in the queue. You mentioned harder to recruit at the beginning of the call. So, that makes it a difficult scenario to say, hey, you're going to go on a new PACS. When you have 240 things in the queue, you're going to have to learn how to use a new PACS. You want them happy. And usually change, at least for the short term, doesn't make people happy. These things factor in, right, to these decisions. It's not a decision in a vacuum of the practical nature of, well, we have this radiology group and they're sort of burning the candle at both ends and they're kind of fried as it is. Maybe we want to leave them alone right now and not make them go on a new PACS. These are part of these decisions, correct?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes down to, as we mentioned earlier, governance. We have service lines for both radiology and cardiology that we talk through, and we use them to help give us direction and guidance on how do we want to move forward. And for us being a nonprofit system, and we have, I believe, 4 different radiology groups, and only one of those are employed. So the others are independent affiliates. And so trying to keep all of those groups really satisfied with the solutions that we have to offer it's a constant working
Big job.
effort. Yeah. And one of those groups is really starting to recruit more in other states and having more remote reading radiologists. So then that's also a challenge of how do we deliver these solutions, because the primary solutions are really meant to be on premise, or you have a full workstation and you have to have that really high internet bandwidth connectivity. And so that can be really expensive as well. So we're trying to work with our vendors to come up with other options to make that hardware footprint less. So that way we can have the ability to recruit radiologists, or it could even be a consulting person where you have somebody that's on call and they need to, it's another type of provider, surgeon or whatever else that needs to see that image, and making that more accessible for them to be able to view while they're on call and responding to that patient
And
emergency.
Paul, as you alluded to, when you're talking about diagnostic, that's completely different scenario, right? Because you can get
Absolutely.
away with a lot of things in a referential approach that diagnostic is okay. This is totally different.
Correct. And that's where we're talking about having the lower footprint for the diagnostic side. So those actually interpreting providers, and they may be 100% remote, and they specialize in a certain type of imaging. And so that group has recruited them, and that's what they want to do. And so that's, we're trying to make that as feasible as we can.
And I would,
Awesome. Go
oh, sorry,
ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead,
going to
Monique,
add to
please.
that. We're talking about physician burnout, but IT burnout is very real. And I'd love to hear Paul's opinion on even imaging IT burnout. I hear from many of my, excuse me, many of my healthcare providers are recruiting to the imaging IT department is even more tricky. So burnout is real across the whole healthcare system. So you also don't want to burden the IT and have those individuals say, now we've made it so complex that their job is not fun anymore either.
Yeah, we're very fortunate with our team that we've not had that turnover or burnout. So we really try and focus on a lot of culture within our IT teams, and being realistic about the responsibilities. And some of the biggest thing is prioritizing the work. There's not a shortage of work to be done. It's all about the prioritization and getting that done so it's reasonable. And that's, I think, is the everyday challenge. Our team is very committed to providing a great end user experience for our providers, which then turns into a really great patient experience. And great patient care. So it's helping them connect them to see the whole purpose. And so they're not just always behind the scenes and doing the IT work, but helping them realize that you have an impact on patient care, even though you're never touching that patient. And that's the really cool thing about healthcare, I think.
Yeah, it's a great point, Monique. We have to watch the IT department has to watch or be cognizant of the ability of the users to absorb change. And the CIO, I suppose, has to be cognizant of the ability of the IT department to manage the projects it's being asked to manage. And that's how that's got to be managed, right, Paul? I mean, that's the CIO is going to be the head of the department, and they occasionally have to push back on requests and say, my team is working at 110 miles an hour. We can't do that right now,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Otherwise, Paul's going to be hanging out his own shingle and say, I've had enough of this. That's right. All right, let's do the ask a co-panelist. Monique, is that count as your question, or do you have another one for
Yeah,
your
I'll
co-panelists?
let my colleagues go first. I always have lots of questions. So we'll let that count and then we'll see how much
All right,
time
I'm
we have.
gonna I'm gonna give it to Paul. I'm gonna give it to Paul. You got some really smart folks here with Lyle and Monique. Pick one of the things you're dealing with and see what they have to say.
Okay, so Lyle, let's go with you. We're exploring VNA
Yep.
possibilities, and so what have you seen with your customer base and how they've deployed VNA? What does that look like, and um, the experiences that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this goes back to the kind of our conversation earlier that there's a lot of different ways to uh, stand up an enterprise medical imaging strategy for an organization, and I would almost say there's at least as many ways to deploy a VNA into that organization. What most people tend to do is put the VNA behind the PACS, although we do have some that put the VNA in front of the PACS. There are advantages to having a second copy immediately available to the organization, and also some of the routing capabilities that you can find in many of the VNA providers, including our own. Putting it at the back seems to be the least disruptive, at least initially, for most organization. It allows you to keep your workflows in place with the PAC system today, and then lower the amount of data that you're storing in those applications by moving the everything, let's say 6 months and older, out into the VNA, or keeping a second, only keeping a second copy for 3 or 4 months in the PACS. That doing that and getting at least that piece of it in place has a lot of initial benefits that we mentioned earlier. You now have your content stored in those different types of data tenants within a VNA. You can set up the complicated routes to serve that information back up again to the clinical systems and the end users that want them. A lot of the magic of a VNA is being able to make things look easy for the end users on the front end, and make things look easy to the clinical systems that are integrating with it. And so there's a lot of power in being able to bring your data together and then make it available in the most focused and secure way possible back out to those other systems that need it, as well as having those unified ILM policies and unified archive devices, unified backup strategies, all that stuff that comes with the consolidation of that data. You start to get right away. So I think because of that, and because of the disruption that most organizations are trying to avoid, and potentially any financial limitations you have around doing a rip and replace of your PAC system, that's what I see most people doing, is putting the VNA at the back after the image has been read, the report has been created, and letting it become the archive that serves up the content to the rest of the organization. The 1-2 punch with all that is always, usually there's some type of a universal viewer that goes with it, so that you can, now that you have this data available, and your most of the data available, you can always federate out into other data sources as needed. But using something like an enterprise viewer at that point is usually the next phase of what people do, so that they now can make those images available for viewing by anyone within the organization. They don't have to be at a workstation. So that's the basic strategy. From there, you start to look at things like cloud archives, cloud migrations. Once you get that content put into one place, you open yourselves up to a lot of possibilities that you probably didn't have before, when you were trying to manually federate the data for a bunch of different use cases. So that's, I think putting it behind the PACS probably is where most people start, but there are advantages to the other configurations as well.
I would just echo what Lyle said. We have been tracking this for 5 or 6 years, and that's what we hear as well. There are multiple ways to do it, and exactly what he just said. So just want to validate that with data and literally hundreds of calls across a variety of vendors. So that was perfect how you said that, Lyle.
Thanks.
I mean, that was pretty amazing, Lyle. I mean, that was pretty cool to listen to. I feel like I should pay you, or that
No,
was pretty
I
wild.
appreciate it.
So there's some real fundamental decision points, Lyle, and you see people deciding in both directions. We talked about in front or behind. People are making different decisions.
They are. I mean, it's like I said, we have some that put it at the front because of the routing capabilities, and they want to have a copy of the image immediately available to other systems. Most put it at the back because they don't want to disrupt the workflow that exists today, and there's storage concerns and things like that. I me personally, I would probably start with it in the behind the PACS, and move forward from there. Just because it's the least disruption, and allows you to get the most gain as quickly as possible. Also allows you to put the foundation in place for the rest of the imaging specialties to come on board without disrupting the PACS as well. So that's kind of where I tend to land on this, but I do have customers doing it the other way, and especially when you get into complex routing, there could be some reasons why you want to put it in front, just to handle those types of workflows.
Yeah, so it's again, it's what are you trying to do is
Mhm.
an initial question before you're going to advise someone, right? Tell me
Yep.
what your goals are, because
Yeah.
each scenario is going to have different benefits. Um, Lyle, do you have a question for one of or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I've got a question for Paul. I'm curious, eh, how deeply Baptist has gotten into deploying of AI algorithms to the radiologist specifically, and have there been any unique findings as far as the performance of your radiologist with AI, or have there been negative, I guess positive or negative on the performance with AI? What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen just trying to get those tools in the hands of your employees?
Yeah, I would say some of the biggest challenges had been, being able to trial out the AI algorithm to see if it's really going to be beneficial for us or not. So we were able to partner with one of our vendors that allows us to bring in different
Uh,
AI algorithms easier into our system. And then that allows us to pick one or two radiologists that might be really interested in this particular area, and they get in and get to trial it out and see, does this really make a difference for us or not? Does it help speed us up? Does it distract us? What is it? And so I think that's been a really good thing for us.
that's great.
Um, we've just started up a AI oversight committee at Baptist, so we're in the early stages of the whole governance of everything AI, because it's exploding so fast. And so just getting that really formal structure up. But radiology has definitely been at the forefront of using some of those AI algorithms. We had one in particular for our breast radiologists where our thought was that it might really help them with the volume of screening mammograms that they do, and having the AI algorithm to help speed up the normals, and then that way they would have more focus time or brain power to really look at those more abnormals and focus in on some of those. And what they found was that it really didn't help them.
Mm.
They're such highly trained that it really didn't offer much for the cost that the algorithm was going to bring. So we opted not to go forward with that one, but we're always open to exploring.
It's like a micro pilot, Paul. You're actually just giving it to one or two radiologists and saying, "Here, play with this algorithm and let me know what you think." So, right? It's like a micro pilot.
Absolutely, and then we can bring that to the larger service council
Mhm.
or service line to be able to review that data and start to see, do we want to expand that any further or not.
Great. All right. I think we're almost out of time. We're gonna go for an around the horn uh final best piece of advice. I mean, people are all over it. Try and frame this up in a way that makes sense. People, I think, are probably all over the place when it comes to their current condition of image sharing or their journey to enterprise imaging. Some have not started or done much at all. Some are in the initial stages, maybe doing research. Maybe some have picked a strategy, one that Lyle laid out. Maybe they're happy with it. Maybe they're having second thoughts. Maybe they wish they put the VNA behind the packs or in front of the packs. I would. So it's a lot. I mean, it's hard to frame this up in a specific way, but I guess I'll just ask for your best piece of advice for someone looking at this in a position like Paul's or a CMO type, CMIO type position, or even a CIO, a CIO that wants to be an ally to those that want to do more image sharing. What's your best piece of advice? Paul, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I think first is listening to what your clinicians need. So using whatever the governance structure is within the organization and really soliciting that feedback on what are the challenges that they're dealing with, where would they like to see the future go, and really understanding those needs, and then helping devise a plan to present to them and say, okay, this is what we think can help solve that problem with the technology. So really having the technology be a tool and a partner to those clinicians, and letting them tell us what they need versus IT saying, oh, well, you got to do this and this is what we're going to do. The adoption is just so much less when that latter option is selected. So I think that's the first piece. And then also just taking a look at your current technology stack and seeing what are the costs that we're spending, because we're seeing software costs just grow exponentially. And so the challenge, as we said earlier, with the lowering operating margins is how can we reduce that spend on software and make that a driving case as well, for
Mhm.
the consolidations.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Monique, your final thought.
Yeah, awesome. And just to echo what Paul said, what do the clinicians need? And then I just want to push that one step forward. What's the very best for patient care? So finding that out, and I push both providers and vendors on this all the time. What problem are you trying to solve? And just getting people on the same page of what problem are you trying to solve. And I love that Paul mentioned looking at the systems you have. We often see when we get on the call and we're talking strategy, an organization or a department does not realize they already have the organization realizes, a department doesn't realize they already have a universal viewer or they already have a VNA in place. So what can they tap into? So I love all of the pieces that he talked about, and then just getting that committee with the governance committee, but also with super users and people that deeply understand it. That is really important. And then always coming back once you get those people on board to those specific questions. What problems are we trying to solve? What's going to make our clinicians most efficient and be the best for the patient care? And I think those few questions, if you can stick to that mission, will help bring everybody back to the same page, and then utilizing what you can.
That's great, Monique. And I specifically was told by someone in charge of who was dealing with pathology, um, that they were able to use a tool the organization already had that was being used in radiology, saved them a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so, yes, find out what's already in the health system. Uh, very good. Lyle, your final thought, and then we'll let everyone go.
Yeah, I think my co-panelists have done an excellent job summarizing this. So I'll just end it by saying the good news for everyone who has interest in doing this is that the technologies exist today to solve these problems. As I mentioned earlier, it's usually organizational. The the challenges that you have internally to get to move this. I mean, it's moving. It's turning the course, you're changing the course of an aircraft carrier, right? And so the technologies exist. There are best practices out there. There are people who have done it, and more are kind of emerging every year. And so I think that's what I'm most optimistic about,
Yeah.
is that I don't think it's a technological hurdle at this point. It's just getting everything in the organization, getting the right support from leadership, and and trying to define really what the true value is for your organization. I think will go a long way in getting you over the hump and trying to get this started.
Yeah, it's a great point, Lyle. I think as people are moving and we can help bring those experiences to light, other people can learn. So events like this today
Hmm.
will help everyone. So thank you for those thoughts. That's about all we had time for today regarding continuing education. You could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our tremendous panel, Paul Butts, Monique Rasband, Lila McMillan. I want to thank Highland Healthcare for sponsoring and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
it.